Good morning, and welcome to the next installment of our sermon series called Sturdy, where we dig into Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount found in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. At the conclusion of his sermon, Jesus says that the person who puts these words into practice is like a wise builder. The wise builder builds his or her house on the rock, and when the storms of life attack that house, it stands firm. So as individuals and as a church family, we're reading these texts and we're asking ourselves, how do we build houses that withstand the storm? How do we build sturdy lives? How do we build a sturdy church? How do we hear these words and put them into practice? We looked at the section we call the Beatitudes, and right off the bat, Jesus turns our world upside down. We start asking ourselves, what does it really mean to be blessed? We're trying to bring good things into our communities. We're trying to live as salt and light. We're attempting to look past the letter of the law and find the heart underneath. We're working on eradicating anger. We're practicing radical reconciliation. We're putting the proper value on people. And today we're going to get into a couple of topics with far-reaching consequences: adultery and divorce. And the truth is that if you're hearing me talk right now, you've probably been intimately affected by one or both of these topics. The relevancy of this passage is undeniable. But let's be honest. Nobody wants to talk about adultery and divorce. I don't want to talk about adultery and divorce. These verses discuss adultery, divorce, and hell. This is like a pastor's Bermuda Triangle. I'd love to just skip this and go right into verse 33. But hang with me. Jesus is saying some things that, even though they're hard to talk about, we probably need to hear. And Jesus is also going to say something revolutionary. There is a really fascinating debate being addressed in the subtext of this passage, and Jesus is going to take an unpopular stand. To get started this morning, I'm going to toss a picture up here on the screen, and all at once, I want you to yell out who it is. Who knows? If you yell loud enough, maybe I'll hear you through my computer speakers. Are you ready? Who is this? That is, of course, Humpty Dumpty, the main character in one of our oldest and most well-known nursery rhymes. The rhyme we know and love goes something like this. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. We can trace this rhyme in various forms all the way back to the late 1700s in England. It became pretty popular in the US in the mid-1800s. In fact, a musical based on Humpty Dumpty was the longest running musical on Broadway until 1891. The interesting thing to me is that in the poem, Humpty is never described as an egg. And yet now, no matter which way he's creepily portrayed, we can easily recognize this character as Humpty Dumpty on sight. Now, let's jump into our text for today in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 32. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. I've outlined three big things that Jesus does here in this teaching. First, Jesus, as he has done several times already in this sermon, addresses the root of the problem. Here's that formula again. You have heard that it was said, don't commit adultery, but I tell you that it starts with lust. This teaching shouldn't really surprise us. If murder starts with anger, then adultery starts with lust. It starts with a desire for someone else. Desires often lead to action. How about a case study? 2 Samuel chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. The story of David and Bathsheba is a heartbreaking one. A lot of pain, a lot of cover-up. And I really don't like the slippery slope argument, because from this point forward, David still has many other chances to make different decisions to keep the story from going where it did. But the first thing that starts this series of unfortunate events is a lustful gaze. David likes what he sees, and he asks someone to find out about her, and I want to highlight this exchange quickly. The man returns and says something important. He says she is Bathsheba. Now, he could have stopped there, but you can almost hear him trying to warn the most powerful man in the world. Through his description, he knows what David is thinking, and he's trying to dissuade him. He presents David with her name and a bit about her identity. She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah. This is someone's daughter and someone's wife. She's a human being. She's a person with a family. And yet, David sends for her anyway. Because here we find a connection to our last passage and a message that Jesus teaches us again and again. Anger allows us to reduce someone's humanity to a level that I can treat them poorly. It takes away their personhood, if you remember from last week. Lust does the exact same thing. Lust takes people and reduces them to objects for the fulfillment of our desires. Again, Jesus teaches us to value people. And so we can see in this story the very progression that Jesus is warning against: lust, desire, and adultery. He continues, "If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." Really quickly here, Jesus is not advocating for self-mutilation. He's using a hyperbole to emphasize a point. And the point is, do what you need to do to remove the temptation. We place such an importance on willpower in our culture that we like to think we can just train ourselves to walk right into the belly of the beast and not be affected. But it doesn't work like that. If I'm on a diet, I'm not going to go to McDonald's to buy a salad because the pictures of those burgers are pretty influential. Jesus is saying be proactive. Find ways to remove yourself from temptation. So first, Jesus addresses the root cause of the problem. And second, Jesus reminds us of the importance of the bond of marriage. Jesus speaks about divorce, and he says, "It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Jesus is really short and abrupt in the way he treats divorce here in Matthew 5. He provides some lengthier teachings elsewhere, and it's helpful to interpret them together. So in particular, let's look at Matthew chapter 19. Matthew 19, beginning in verse 3. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female? and said, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." "Why then," they asked, "did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Jesus replied, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another woman, commits adultery." In both of these texts, Jesus values the covenant of marriage. It's in the adultery text, it's in the divorce text of Matthew 5, and here again in chapter 19. The Pharisees want to have a debate about divorce, and Jesus wants to talk about the importance of the marriage covenant. Jesus is going to take a hard line on divorce because of the incredible spiritual holy thing that happens in the midst of a marriage. So when it comes to adultery and divorce, Jesus addresses the root of the problem. He emphasizes the marriage covenant. And now the third thing. I mentioned at the beginning that Jesus was going to say something revolutionary, and he does. We've been reading it this whole time. As modern-day Christians and followers of Jesus whose lives have been intimately affected by adultery and divorce, as people who have been divorced and remarried, as people who have divorced and remarried parents and family members, we might read this and be shocked by the line that Jesus draws in the sand when it comes to divorce and remarriage. And so was Jesus's original audience. Because the revolutionary thing that Jesus implies here is that a man could commit adultery. This whole teaching on adultery is aimed at the male gender. Now, obviously, men and women can commit adultery. So why does Jesus take this tone? Leon Morris, in his commentary on the book of Matthew, puts it this way. In the ancient world, generally, it was held that a married man could have sexual adventures as long as they did not involve a married woman, which would mean violating the rights of her husband. A woman, however, was expected to have no such relations. She should be chaste before marriage and faithful after it. The command Jesus cites makes no distinction. People of both sexes were to remain faithful. Specifically, he speaks of the man as the adulterer. Pause this video and go back and read that again. Think about the burden that this places on women. If a married man had an extramarital affair with a single woman, the woman could be punished and the man could not. The stance that Jesus takes here is in defense of women. It's in defense of the vulnerable. The same underlying theme appears in the next teaching as well. The problem with divorce in the ancient world is that it left women hanging out to dry. There were not many options for a divorced woman, whereas it had nearly no effect on the man. And the consequences for the woman could be dire. Many times the only two options were to hope that their fathers accepted them back into their childhood homes, or they had to turn to prostitution in order to provide for themselves. So through Moses, God provides for divorced women. In Deuteronomy 24, Moses instructs God's people to issue something called a certificate of divorce. The certificate protected the rights of a woman and made it easier for her to remarry. The provision in Deuteronomy 24 was, at that time, a radical step toward honoring and protecting women. Through time, though, this became used as a free pass. In that Deuteronomy 24 passage, there's a reference to a cause of divorce. The English translation says that if a man finds something indecent about his wife, that he can't divorce her and then remarry her. But that indecent line, people pulled out, and it became a really hotly debated topic. Future readers would take that and begin to debate about the situations that could bring about a legal divorce. What actually qualified as indecent? At the time of Jesus, there were two schools of thought led by the two most popular rabbis of the day, Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shamai. Rabbi Shamai took the hard line and deduced that only a grave offense against the marriage could constitute a divorce. Rabbi Hillel, on the other hand, preferred a much broader view. In fact, he argued that if anything caused the husband to find his wife unseemly, that he could divorce her, including if she burned his food, if he eventually just got tired of her looks, or even if he found a younger, more attractive woman. You can imagine which view the men of Jesus' day opted to follow. You can hear this debate echoed in that Matthew 19 discussion. Some Pharisees came to him to test him, and they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" And Jesus says, no. And in light of this background debate, listen to Jesus' teaching. Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Jesus is protecting the rights of the vulnerable. Jesus is protecting women. Jesus is taking the heart behind the certificate of divorce and doubling down on it. This is a sermon for another day, but I can't help but mention that in these early days, God's people were radical champions for the rights of women. We've lagged in recent history, and one could argue that we are behind the curve now. But Jesus is angering a lot of people, a lot of powerful people, to defend the rights of women. So in this text, the three things Jesus does again. Number one, he addresses the root of the problem. Number two, he places a great importance on the covenant of marriage. And number three, he radically defends the powerless. I've used this quote before, but it keeps rattling around in my head. In 2009, author Haruki Murakami said this in an acceptance speech for an award he had received. "Between a high, solid wall and an egg that breaks against it, I will always stand on the side of the egg." Which brings us all the way back to Humpty Dumpty. The character of Humpty Dumpty is now a common literary allusion, particularly to refer to a person in an insecure position, or something that would be difficult to reconstruct once broken. Which is why we depict Humpty Dumpty as an egg. People, like eggs, are hard to put back together once they're broken. And the worst part of adultery, and the worst part of divorce, is the pain that it causes to real human beings. And so Jesus says, protect your eyes, protect your hearts. You married people, protect your marriages. And every one of us should protect the vulnerable in our communities. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday.